I've never liked family parties, especially the kind where every glance feels like they're dissecting you as some kind of moral cautionary tale. But that night, I showed up, on time, wearing the oldest navy dress I owned, and told myself, just survive a few hours. It was my cousin Madison's engagement party, held at a high-end Italian restaurant in the heart of Phoenix, where warm golden lights hit every champagne glass just right, and soft jazz played like someone was trying to pour artificial grace into the air. I was seated at the far end of the long table, between my mother and Aunt Bonnie, the one who always carries cat photos in her wallet like family heirlooms. I honestly thought Madison would keep her word. No personal stuff, I promise. Just food and fun. It was naive of me to believe her. As soon as the first glass of champagne was empty, she stood up, grinning like a talk show host. "Hey everyone," she called out, tapping her spoon against the glass with a clink. "I just want to say one quick thing. I'm honestly so grateful I found someone like Bryce. Kind, sweet, and most importantly, never been scratched." The whole table chuckled. Madison turned to look at me, paused for just a beat, then laughed. "I just hope I don't make the same mistakes as certain people. I could never be brave enough to raise a kid alone at 32. One beat of silence. Then laughter broke like a wave. Uncle Rick, my mom's brother, slapped the table and howled, "Come on, Brooklyn. Men don't go back for used goods. No one wants a car after it's been wrecked." I heard my mom exhale through her nose. She gave a half smile, didn't say a word, and poured herself more wine. No protest. No defense. I sat there, trying to keep my spine straight, my eyes fixed on the glass of water in front of me, heat crawling up from my neck to my ears. I didn't look at anyone. I was afraid that if I did, I'd stand up and say something I couldn't take back. Madison kept performing like what she said was just a harmless little joke. I mean, who knows, maybe I'll end up being the second fabulous single mom in the family, she laughed loudly, tossing her head back like she'd just nailed a punchline. They all laughed with her. Not politely, gleefully, the kind of laugh people say for jokes they've been dying to tell. I clenched my napkin on my lap, my fingers trembling. Bryce. Madison's fiancé sat beside her, not laughing. He stared at his plate like it might burst into flames. But he didn't say anything either. I felt like a misprinted poster hung by mistake at a glamorous event. They looked at me like I was the leftover evidence of a bad decision they didn't want their kids repeating. No one spoke up for me. No one told Madison to stop. I glanced to the far end of the room where my 8-year-old son Liam was seated at the kids' table. He was coloring a school bus with a green crayon, completely unaware that his mom was being publicly torn apart just a few feet away. I swallowed hard. They say single moms are weak, but I made it through 5 winters with the power shut off halfway through the month. I stayed up all night freelancing and still woke early to cook breakfast for Liam before 2nd grade. And yet here I was. One comment from Madison, one round of laughter from my relatives, and I suddenly felt small again, labeled a mistake, right in the middle of my own life. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, not to cry, but to keep myself from standing up and doing something I'd regret. I used to think silence was the worst thing, but no. The worst thing is the look in the eyes of people who once called you family, when they decide you're a warning label. When I found out I was pregnant, I was 23. I'd already planned to transfer into the master's program in social work down in San Diego. But then came one red line. Then 2. Then a call that went unanswered. And finally a short text. "I'm not ready." My mom called it a consequence. She didn't yell, didn't get angry, just set down her teacup, stared at me for a long time and said, "Brooklyn, at least maybe you'll learn something from this." I moved out 2 days later and into a tiny studio apartment in Glendale. That summer was scorching. The air conditioner in the unit roared like a tractor every time it ran. I slept on a thin mattress pushed against the wall. Liam was born one morning in September, 2 weeks early. No one came to the hospital. On the birth certificate I wrote undisclosed under father's name. The first 3 years blurred together with diaper changes, bottle washing, and back-to-back shifts. I worked mornings as a waitress at a coffee shop and delivered for a nap in the evenings. At first, I told myself it was just for a few months, but those few months turned into years. Rent was the thing that stared me down at the end of every month like a final warning. There were times my bank account dropped to exactly $12. I waited outside the library at 7 a.m. just to use free Wi-Fi to apply for jobs. I ate instant noodles for a week straight to afford cough syrup for my son. And my family? They never asked, they only judged. At the few family gatherings I dared show up to, Aunt Angela would ask, half joking, "Brooklyn, still doing those little side gigs? Why not ask Uncle Harry for a desk job? It's got AC and insurance." As if I hadn't tried. As if I didn't have solid reasons for refusing to work under a man who once called me the only stain on our family name. As for Madison, she once burst out laughing when I told her I was picking up editing work for international students at night. "So, you're reading other people's term papers for money. That's efficient." The last time I spoke to Madison face to face was about 6 months before the engagement party, at a baby shower for a mutual friend. She walked in, tight dress, bright red lipstick, voice carrying through the room. I was in the side room changing Liam's diaper when she passed by, raised an eyebrow and said, "Still clinging to diapers and wet wipes, huh? It's like you're collecting bad life choices." I laughed, the kind of laugh you use to keep the peace, but I left the party early anyway. A month before her engagement party, I got the invitation. Thick cardstock, gold trim, a faint scent of expensive perfume clinging to the envelope. My name embossed on the front. Brooklyn Sinclair cordially invited. Inside a handwritten note. "Hope you can make it. It'll be so fun. Madison." I stared at it on the kitchen counter for days, sitting there between the electric bills, milk receipts, and Liam's school notices. My mom called exactly 3 times. The first was to ask if I'd received the invitation. The second was to say, "The whole family will be there." The third was more direct. "You should go. You can't avoid them forever. Go, eat something, smile a little, keep the peace. It's just one evening." I understood the subtext. Don't cause a scene. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. Don't embarrass the family because of you. So I went. Not because I wanted to, but because I'd grown used to swallowing things that needed to be said. I wore an old dress, borrowed a pair of shoes from the neighbor downstairs, and let Liam choose my necklace. My son said, "Wear this one, Mom. It looks like my heart." He didn't know that he was the only thing that still made me feel like I had worth in my own eyes. I didn't go for the party. I went to remind myself that I wasn't afraid of their stares anymore. Even if I had to sit in a room full of people who once treated me like a living warning label, I would still walk in. The moment I stepped into the reception hall, I knew I wasn't genuinely welcome. The lighting was warm and dim, glasses clinked together, and the blend of Chanel perfume and red wine hung in the air like everyone there had dressed themselves in layers of manufactured elegance. I didn't have that kind of layer. What I had was clarity. Madison came over first. Her red satin dress hugged every curve like this party was her own personal runway. She tilted her head, lips curled in a way that said more than her words. "Oh, Brooklyn, I really didn't think you'd show up. Are you here alone, or did you bring Liam?" I smiled, keeping my tone even. "Liam's here. He's over in the play area." "Of course," she nodded, voice light as air. "I set up a cute little corner for the kids, dinosaur cookies and Crayola crayons." She didn't ask if Liam had any allergies, didn't ask if I needed anything. She just turned away and blended back into the crowd like she'd completed a difficult diplomatic duty. A server led me to my seat, at the very end of the table, between Mrs. Diane, the one who still sends weekly prayer chain emails to everyone, and Mr. Stan, who manages to insert a Vietnam War anecdote into every conversation regardless of context. My mother had arrived earlier and was seated a few chairs away. She glanced at me as I sat down, then looked away, as if weighing whether to start a conversation or pretend she was really focused on the piece of baguette in her dish. I set down my purse, pulled out my phone, and quickly texted Liam. "I'm at the last table on the right. Text me if you need anything." Liam replied with a photo of his coloring page. A purple-toothed shark against a sky full of light blue stars. I smiled, just for that. "What are you doing now, Brooklyn?" Mrs. Diane asked without looking up from her salad. "I'm still freelancing," I said. "Oh, like online articles and stuff?" She smiled like I'd just told her I sold cotton candy at the state fair. "Does that come with health insurance, honey?" I didn't answer. That question was never about concern. It was her way of saying, "You're not doing okay and we all know it." Mr. Stan chimed in. "I tell Mary all the time, being a single mom is rough. Without a man it's all wobbly. But hey, Brooklyn's lucky to have such a well-behaved little guy." He laughed heartily, like he'd just awarded me a survival medal. I picked up my glass of water, took a sip, and reminded myself not to react. Not here. Not now. Another cousin, Haley, brushed past behind me. She patted my shoulder and leaned down to whisper, "That dress is fine, a little vintage." And then she vanished like a passing breeze. I looked around the room. Polished smiles, cheek kisses with eyes that darted elsewhere. Everyone looked successful, polished, perfectly curated. But everything felt as thin as frosting on a too-dry cake. Pretty, but unable to hide the bitterness underneath. Liam was still seated just a few feet away at the kids' table, completely separated from me and the world of carefully controlled facades. I saw him breaking a cookie in half to share with the blonde girl. For him, this was just a night of toys and sweets. For me, it was a constant effort not to let each breath turn into a sigh. Madison stood in the center of the room, glowing with laughter beside Bryce, her fiancé, who looked like he had borrowed his smile from someone else. He held a wine glass but didn't drink. Every so often, his eyes drifted toward me. Once, our gazes met. Just for a moment. Then he looked away. I didn't know what he was thinking, and I didn't care. What I cared about was the fact that I'd been seated at the far end, deliberately placed out of view, like an object that didn't match the lighting, and they thought that would make me stay quiet, stay small. But what they forgot is this. I'm no longer the girl who cried in the bathroom at 23 over a single text message. I've survived more than anyone in this room would dare admit to. And if they thought tonight would be the night I'd lower my head, then they've clearly never seen me walk through a storm. As soon as the main course was cleared, the lights in the room softened, the background music faded, and Madison stood up. I saw it coming a few seconds before. How she adjusted her dress, glanced toward the center of the room, and lifted her glass with a look of giddy anticipation she didn't even try to hide. "Attention, everyone!" she beamed, like she'd just won the lottery. "I just want to say a few words before dessert." People turned toward her, smiling faces, a few phones raised to capture what they assumed would be a sweet, memorable moment. I set my fork down gently. A chill crept from the back of my neck down my spine. Bryce sat next to her, his face tense. He wasn't smiling. Just stared down at his wine glass, slowly turning it in his hand. Madison raised her glass high, her voice ringing out with smug pride. "I still can't believe I'm marrying someone like Bryce. He's smart, calm, responsible, and most importantly, so patient." The room erupted with laughter. A few whistles came from the left side of the table. Mrs. Diane placed her hand over her heart, nodding like she was witnessing the love story of the century. Madison waited for the laughter to die down, then squinted playfully. "Honestly, I just hope our marriage doesn't end up like some examples around this room." She turned her head just slightly, but it sliced through me like a blade. "What I mean is," Madison went on, twirling her champagne glass, I don't think I'd be strong enough to raise a kid alone at 32. I admire that, truly, but I leave that kind of greatness to someone else." A few people let out bursts of laughter like they couldn't hold it back. Someone at the end of the table said, "At least the car hasn't been totaled like some of the older models." "Oh, come on," another voice chimed in. "I doubt the trade-in value is even half of what it started at." Laughter roared again, sweeping across the room like a wave, drowning any space left for decency. My skin felt like it was burning. Every cell in my body wanted to disappear. But I stayed seated. I didn't walk out. I didn't lower my head. I just placed my hands on my lap, clutching the napkin until it wrinkled into a crumpled mess. Madison kept going as if she'd just wrapped up a light-hearted joke. She shifted topics to how she'd made Bryce give up his gaming console, how she organized the wedding planning in Excel, speaking in a flat tone like she was reciting a well-rehearsed script. But the laughter didn't roll as loud this time. A few people exchanged uneasy glances. No one said anything, but no one stood up either. My mother looked down, awkwardly studying her wrist like she'd just realized her bracelet was missing. Bonnie sat silently, her dessert spoon frozen in midair. I glanced around, looking for Liam. My son was still at the kids' table, drawing a rocket ship with a green crayon. His face was lit up, innocent in a way that made my chest ache. He had no idea his mother was being shredded just a few steps away by people who once claimed to love her. He also didn't know that when I named him Liam, I chose a name that meant resolute protector, because I hoped that even a part of him would grow stronger than I ever had to be. I remembered the night 2 years ago when I had to hold Liam while we slept in the car after being evicted. I remembered sitting there, my hand shielding his little head, whispering to myself, "No one will ever laugh in his face. I'll take every one of their laughs if it means he never has to." I bit my lip, pressing it tightly to stop the words forming in my throat from coming out. Because I knew this night wouldn't end with Madison's cheap joke. It wouldn't end with the sneers of relatives who stood behind their laughter too cowardly to face truth. I didn't know exactly what would happen next, but one thing I knew for sure, this night wasn't going to end the way they wanted it to. Because I hadn't survived all those years, all those battles, just to be taken down by one glass of cheap champagne and a cruel comment. When the laughter faded, I thought everything would carry on as usual. They'd talk, I'd stay silent, and the evening would roll past like nothing had happened. I was used to being the name mentioned as a cautionary tale, a what not to do story wrapped in a few smug jokes. But this time, something was different. I stood up. Not a sound, no one called on him, no one expected it. The chair scraped back with a small click, just loud enough to freeze the entire room. Madison turned, her brow tightening. "What are you doing?" she asked, still trying to sound gentle, though her eyes were beginning to flicker with alarm. Bryce didn't answer. He walked slowly, one step at a time, along the length of the table. I watched him, my heart tightening instinctively. A dozen scenarios flashed through my mind. Another verbal blow, a final declaration, the official conclusion to my public humiliation. But the look in Bryce's eyes wasn't what I expected. When he stopped right beside me, the room felt like it had been drained of air. No one spoke. No more clinking glasses, no more spoons tapping bowls, only the faint hum of jazz in the distance. Bryce turned to face everyone. His voice was low and steady. He didn't need to raise it. It was clear enough to quiet the room. "I think there's something everyone here should know." A chair shifted on the left side of the room. My mom looked up, her brow furrowed. Bonnie froze mid-motion. Uncle Rick's face tightened, like he'd smelled something foul. But no one dared interrupt. Bryce looked around slowly, then stopped at Madison. "Story earlier, it wasn't funny. It wasn't a joke, it was an insult. Cruel and intentional. And I can't sit here like I agree with it." Madison gave a nervous smile. "Bryce, what are you doing? This is—" "I need to say this," he cut her off. "Because she deserves to be spoken about with respect, not mockery." I sat still, my hands still resting on my napkin. I could barely breathe. "I met Brooklyn 2 years ago," Bryce continued. "Back then, I'd just been laid off from a software company in Tempe. I didn't tell anyone, not Madison, not my parents. I was ashamed. I spiraled. I drank almost every night. I fell apart and no one around me noticed." He turned to look at me. "Except her." I froze. His eyes were real, not performative, but holding more than words could carry. Brooklyn wasn't my close friend. At the time, we'd only known each other for a few weeks, but she saw I was sinking, and she didn't ask why. She just reached out and pulled me up. He turned back to face the room. The air thickened. Madison was no longer smiling. She stood up, her voice rising. "What are you doing? This is our engagement party, Bryce." Bryce turned to her, something fierce sparking in his eyes. "Right. And you just used that engagement to humiliate a woman who has done more than anyone else in this room? Do you even know she raised her child alone for years? Do you know how many times Brooklyn refused help just to protect her pride? Do you know she worked nights and mornings and still found time to teach her son how to write his name?" No one spoke. No one laughed anymore. "So," Bryce concluded, "if anyone here thinks Brooklyn is the picture of failure, then let me be clear. You're very, very wrong." I didn't know if I was shaking from shock or emotion. I only knew I was still seated there, silent, right at the center of a storm I hadn't started, but had somehow become the eye of. Liam was still across the room, carefully coloring the last flame beneath a red rocket ship. Calm, untouched. I glanced at Bryce again. Not because he rescued me, but because, after all these years, someone finally stood tall and told the truth about me, in the very place that had swallowed my self-worth whole. Bryce didn't back down. His voice remained calm but sharp. Sharp in the way a scalpel is, not to soothe but to cut away the mask in a room full of faces that had just finished laughing. Madison, he said, never raising his voice, you love the spotlight, that's not a flaw. But the way you mocked Brooklyn tonight in front of this entire family wasn't light, it was cruelty, dressed in designer. Madison stood frozen, her face turning red from shock, all trace of charm gone. No trace of the poised, polished hostess she usually was at gatherings. Bryce didn't wait for her reply, he turned back to the room. Brooklyn was the only one who helped me back then. Not the polite kind of help, he continued, but real help. She read every line of my resume, stayed up with me all night to write cover letters, called a former friend in HR, drove me to my interview because I didn't trust myself to be steady enough behind the wheel. He turned to me. She even watched a child she didn't know, just so I could meet the hiring manager, and not once did she bring it up. Not once did she expect credit. I swallowed hard. The room had gone still. As if every person there had been forced to hold up a mirror to their own conscience. So? Bryce looked back at the crowd. When you sit here laughing at her, mocking her for not having a husband, for being a single mom, for not being refined, you're not just laughing at a woman. You're mocking the strongest person in this room. I heard my mother make a soft sound, barely a gasp, like a thread snapped in the middle of that silence. I turned to see her face away, her fingers tightening around her water glass. Madison cut in, her voice like steel. You're being dramatic. I was just joking, and she always acts so saintly. Bryce looked at her like he didn't recognize her at all. She doesn't act noble, she lives it, every day. Can you say the same? The question dropped like a stone. No one responded. No one stood up to defend Madison. Not even her mother. Elaine, the woman known for controlling every moment in a room, who now simply clutched the strap of her handbag without saying a word. Bryce exhaled and looked back at me. I've sat through plenty of dinners, listened to endless fake compliments, watched people perform kindness like it was currency. But tonight, I can't sit here quietly. Not because Brooklyn is weak and needs anyone to protect her, but because she's been so strong for so long, you've mistaken her silence as permission to keep stepping on her, and I won't allow that. I stayed seated. My eyes were wet, but no tears fell. Something inside me shifted. Not pain, but the feeling of finally being seen. Bryce turned again and spoke one final sentence. Brooklyn isn't the name you forgot on the guest list. She's the only person in this room who actually saved someone. And you're sitting here laughing at her like she's the stain on your wedding. I'll say this once. If any of you think being a single mother is a failure, then you've never understood strength in your entire life. The room fell so quiet it felt like someone had sucked all the oxygen out. Madison sat down, her face pale. I turned my head and saw Liam look up at that exact moment, waving at me with a bright smile. He smiled back, and for the first time in years, that smile wasn't forced. The room stayed unnaturally still. No more laughter, no more snide remarks. No one stepped in to rescue Madison. The confidence on her face had drained away, replaced by a simmering frustration she couldn't hide. She sat back quickly, shoulders stiff, eyes scanning the room like she was searching for backup. But no one offered it. I looked around and saw everyone avoiding my gaze. A few tried to bury their faces in their wine glasses. Others busied themselves cutting into dessert as if it suddenly demanded all their attention. Some looked genuinely uncomfortable, but most simply stayed quiet. The same silence that had followed me for years, ever since I chose to be a single mother and was quietly pushed aside. My mother still sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her silver bracelet faintly trembling. She looked at me for a long moment. Not with disapproval, not even disappointment, This time her expression was something closer to realization. That maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong for far too long. And that for far too long her silence had been a form of complicity. I didn't wait for an apology, I didn't need one, because no apology could undo the years I spent biting down and raising my child alone while they all pretended I didn't exist, as if I were a blemish not worth mentioning at family dinners. I turned to Bryce. He stood beside me, saying nothing more. His eyes didn't need to explain. There was only certainty. Steadiness. He wasn't rescuing me. He was simply standing there as a mirror reflecting the truth that everyone else in the room had refused to face for far too long. He leaned in slightly and said quietly, "You don't belong here, and you don't have to stay." I nodded, not for permission, but to confirm something I had known for a long time, that I no longer had anything to prove to these people. I stood up, slowly but with resolve. The chair slid back with a dry scrape that echoed through the stifling quiet. I didn't look around to see who was watching. I didn't seek a reaction from my mother or Madison. Bryce had already said everything that needed to be said, and everyone had heard it. I walked toward Liam's table. He was still focused, adding more stars to his drawing, completely unaware of everything that had just happened. He looked up when he saw me, his face lighting up. "Mom, I'm done. Can I bring this home?" "Of course," I said, crouching to help him fold the paper gently. "We're heading out now, okay?" "I'm hungry," Liam said softly. "The spaghetti got cold." I smiled. "Let's stop by our taco spot on the way home." He nodded, cheerfully stuffing his crayons into his bag. I held his hand and walked with him across the long room, past dozens of eyes watching us in silence. Some avoided my gaze, some looked down. A few glanced at each other but said nothing. As I passed my mother, she didn't move. Only her eyes followed me. I paused for a second, not to wait, just to let her know I saw her. I saw all of them. And I kept walking. Not for her, for me. Bryce stepped aside to let us pass. He didn't touch me. He didn't act noble, he simply nodded the way a man does when he respects a woman. Truly respects her. Her doors opened, and for the first time all evening I took a full breath. The night air was cool, no longer heavy with perfume and pretense. Just me and my son. And a road ahead that finally felt open. Free from stares, judgments, and fake smiles. I didn't look back. Not out of pride, but because there was nothing behind me worth looking back at. I drove slowly through the familiar streets of Glendale. Liam sat in the back seat, eating his taco and humming some tune he learned at school. The early month moon hung over the quiet sky, its light slipping softly through the windshield, like a gentle, overdue welcome. I didn't speak. I didn't turn on the radio. I just let the rhythm of Liam's breathing and the tires against the pavement soundtrack my thoughts. I should have felt sad. At least confused, maybe angry. But no. The clearest feeling in my chest was relief. A weight had been lifted. One I'd carried for so long, I didn't even realize how heavy it had been until it was gone. I didn't need anyone in that room to apologize. I didn't need Madison to admit she was wrong. I didn't need my mother to say I was wrong. Because what I needed was no longer approval. I had survived. I had stood up. I had raised a child with nothing but my bare hands, and a heart that refused to quit. And tonight, walking out of that room with Liam beside me, I didn't feel like the outcast. I felt like the only one who left without compromising herself. Bryce didn't save me. He wasn't some hero who reached down and lifted me from the darkness. What he did, what mattered most, was that he saw me. Truly saw me. And in doing so, he forced the rest of that room to see me too. I used to wonder what my worth was without someone beside me to confirm it. But now I know. I don't need anyone's permission to be strong, to take up space, to speak my truth. I don't need applause to walk forward on legs that once trembled, that once staggered, but never collapsed. Liam had already drifted off to sleep by the time we got back to our apartment complex. I turned off the engine, stepped out, opened the back door, and gently lifted him into my arms. And in that moment, I realized I had won. Not the cinematic kind of victory, No fireworks, no spotlights, but something quiet, lasting, and real. I had kept the light alive in my son without letting the world's darkness drown him. After tucking Liam into bed, I sat for a while in the living room, still in the same dress I'd once worried was out of fashion, barefoot, hair loose. The warm yellow light fell on the rocket ship drawing he'd left on the table. I looked at it, then at my reflection in the mirror, and I knew I was enough. I didn't need to be prettier, I didn't need to be married, I didn't need to be wildly successful. I didn't need to become anything more than who I already was. The woman who once broke, who once stayed silent in the face of shame, but never let that silence define her. I thought about the other women, the ones who'd been looked at with pity, called damaged goods, treated like a problem that needed fixing. And I want to say this in case someone's listening. You are not broken, you are not excess, you are not something to be hidden in shame. You are enough, right here, right now, exactly as you are, even if you're still trying, even if you haven't figured it out. Your existence matters. No one gets to tell you to shrink yourself to fit their expectations. I don't know what tomorrow holds. I still owe tuition for Liam. I'm still hustling late-night writing gigs. Still hoping the car doesn't break down halfway through the month. But one thing I do know. I'm no longer letting shame steer my life. And I walked out of that room that no longer deserved me. Upright, hand in hand with my son, without asking permission, without needing anyone to tell me I had the right to exist as I am. Brooklyn's story isn't just about overcoming shame and judgment. It's a powerful reminder that a woman's worth doesn't depend on whether or not she's married, but on how she lives, how she loves, and how she stands firm for the things that truly matter. In real life, there are many women like Brooklyn, quietly fighting, raising children, and building honest lives without asking permission to be whole. They don't need saving, they just need to be seen. What did you think about Brooklyn's story? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories about family, healing, and the quiet strength that changes everything.